what's the equation on how much this is like probably a strange sounding question, but what's the equation on how much we should focus on cultural issue, whether we're talking about complaining about people who have pronouns in their bio, or free speech or censorship? How much should we focus on policy? Because there's some people that strictly focus on policy that think these cultural issues sort of just are on the back burner, like David Pacman. And there are other people who say the exact opposite. That you have the whole Breitbart motto that's politics is downstream from culture. So if you want to change the political landscape, you first have to change the cultural landscape. What are your thoughts on this sort of equation? What are the variables you plug into it?
That's a really good question. I think we should focus more on policy. And I say that realizing that policy is something that I'm less interested in than in cultural issues. So I think that's sort of a personal flaw of mine, is that I get sort of more riled up about these cultural issues than I do policy, because policy is what we vote on is policy. The cultural issues are, of course, a part of that. And actually, I take that back. What we vote on isn't policy, but it should be policy. What we vote on is oftentimes personality, who our friends vote for, who has pissed you off online today or whatever. It doesn't tend to be always a rational decision. And I think if we voted on policy, people would be a little bit more rational about that. So while I'm deeply interested in these cultural issues, I frankly find them more interesting than policy. I do think that it is a detriment that people like me, and maybe people like you, focus more on these things on Twitter and and these sort of like inner scene fights than we do on what's actually happening at a government level. And part of that is just because it's more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree, and that seems to be opposed to what I do, since a lot of my content is very critical of the sort of critical method, stuff that's going on in the academy, and that's not necessarily because I think it's the most important, but it's the thing that I'm most the thing that I'm most familiar with. So
Sure.
I'm in the academy, I'm in the university, I see this stuff happening all the time, and I feel like I'm better equipped to talk about that than something like policy issues, where
Sure.
a lot of it just goes over my head.
And
So
there are,
just,
sorry to interrupt you, but there
yeah,
are, in a lot of ways, Breitbart is right. The idea that policy is downstream of culture. And you can see that right now in the Biden administration. Obviously, you see it in the Trump administration too. But right now, I voted for Biden. I wrote pieces about why people should vote for Biden. For me, a vote for Biden was really a vote against Donald Trump. Not that I particularly like Joe Biden, but I just really don't like Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Like, I think most Americans, at least most Americans who voted for him. It's not like there was this like passionate surge because people loved Joe Biden. It was really a response to the Trump administration. But just, Biden isn't even in office yet. And he's issued these policy plans that I think really are terrible, that are going to be bad, could potentially be disastrous if they're already implemented. It depends on what happens in the Senate, of course. And they're cultural issues. So things like, for instance, Title IX, right? So this is a policy issue that Joe Biden, I'm sure you guys know the Biden, but for your listeners, the Obama administration, and specifically Joe Biden, pushed these reforms to Title IX that made it really difficult for people accused of sexual assault on campus to get a fair hearing. And this has become a cultural issue. It's a policy issue, but it's also a cultural issue. And it pits, feminists against people who are in favor of civil liberties. And already Joe Biden, it looks like, will be, Betsy DeVos is Secretary of Education, reform these Title IX policies. And Joe Biden, it looks like, will probably immediately revoke that. So it is both, right? This is culture and this is policy. And what we're gonna be seeing is, depending on who Biden appoints, and also Harris, her influence in the administration, which I think is honestly more troubling than Biden himself. What we'll be seeing is, if they bring people into this administration who have those particular cultural positions, people who are feminist oftentimes, and not that I think there's any, not that I think that feminism is a bad thing, but I do think in this particular way, it's, this position is morally incorrect, then this will have an impact on policy. So, it's all very connected.